I was a Snohomish County Deputy Sheriff assigned to the Detective Division. I was contacted by the dispatcher. They were requesting that I respond to an address in the Alderwood area regarding a homicide and that they needed somebody to process the crime scene for fingerprints.
Susan Schwartz's boyfriend arrives home after a day at work to find the 24-year-old woman dead on the floor.
The house was off the main road. It wasn't very large. There was a body in the bathroom, a female subject. Her hands were tied behind her back with what appeared to be some type of electrical cord. She was nude, and she appeared to have a gunshot wound to her head.
There was a pillow next to her head that had blood on it and a bullet hole shot through it. And there was blood on the floor and all over her face. She had a black bra wrapped around her face like a gag. There were .22 caliber shell casings that were laying on the floor there. It appeared that she'd been shot in the head execution style after she'd been tied up. So it was a horrific crime.
Maybe she had interrupted a burglar. It didn't make any sense because most burglars run when they're confronted by somebody.
As police process the house, the carpet seems to offer up some possible clues.
This was plush carpeting, and you could see that there were distinctive prints of two different sizes, a smaller one and a larger one. She was barefooted, so there was no barefoot prints that were on the carpet. We had two different suspects that we were looking at.
As police scour Susan's home, something feels off, way off.
The feelings that I had, it was just overwhelming terror and shock, anger, and the ever-present why. Why? Why would someone do that to her?
The cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds to her head. There's also lacerations to her head. The lacerations meant that it appears that she was attacked first, hit in the head, maybe would have dazed her. That would have led the person to be able to take control and then tie her up. Even though she was naked, there was no signs of a sexual assault.
Police shift their focus and question Karen Smith, Susan's best friend, who recently separated from her abusive husband, Gregory Johnson.
The police asked me if I knew anybody that might have something against Sue. My husband, Greg, didn't like Sue because he thought that she was trying to break us up. She didn't particularly like Greg. She just thought that he was basically an abusive type person. She didn't trust him. Eventually, he started feeling it.
The detective did go and talk to Gregory Johnson. He was cooperative. They asked him where he was on the day of the murder, and he said he was fishing. Detectives tracked down the people he was fishing with. And, memories are not that great, so the people weren't able to really verify he was there or not there. I think he remained a person of interest, but then there's really nothing else to indicate that Greg was involved.
For months, detectives search for Susan's killer, but without a motive or any suspects, the case stalls.
In 1986, there was a murder in Seattle that bore many similarities to Sue's murder. The victim was Molly McClure, and she was lying on her stomach. She had her hands tied behind her back with electrical cord. There was a gag in her mouth. She had injuries to her head.
Police zero in on a suspect. Sherwood Knight lives in the building and has a criminal record.
In Molly's case, she was sexually assaulted and Susan was not. But the other similarity between the two was that Sherwood Knight knew both of the women.
Knight turns out to be the half-brother of Gregory Johnson, the estranged, abusive husband of Susan's best friend, Karen. Snohomish detectives track down Gregory Johnson and find him in prison, doing time for robbery. It was not the first time he had been behind bars. And Johnson has a story to tell that he says took place on the day of Susan Schwartz's murder.
He says, I was with my brother, Sherwood. I was driving him around with a couple other guys looking for a place to burglarize, and we pulled into this driveway, and the three of them went in, and they came out of the house, and Sherwood had a gun in his hand, and he says, we better not get caught for this one. And later on that night, I was watching the news on TV, and they said that Susan Shores was murdered.
Since detectives can't connect him to Susan's murder, her case now goes colder than a winter ice storm in Washington state. Detectives refuse to give up on finding Susan's killer. In 2009, they try an innovative tactic, hoping to jumpstart the case.
Our detective in Florida had put out a deck of cold case playing cards and put them into the prisons, and they'd solved more than a half a dozen cases. On the back, it says that Crime Stoppers will pay you a reward if you call in a tip. We put Susan Schwartz on the Queen of Hearts.
In 2011, Sherwood Knight was thinking about his own situation. He had been playing cards with the other inmates with these cold case cards, and he noticed the picture of Susan.
Sherwood Knight, who was serving a life sentence, said that he had information about who killed Sue Shores.
He told us that on the day that Susan Schwartz was murdered, he was down fishing on the pier, and Greg Johnson, his half-brother, drove up.
Greg had told him that, hey, if the police come asking about me, tell them that I was fishing with you on this day. Sherwood said that he asked him why, and Greg responded, because I killed Sue.
Sherwood said he was pretty shocked, and he could see in the car that there was a girl sitting in the front seat. If Greg had just killed Susan, maybe this girl was with him and might know something.
She confirmed that when she was 17, that she was in a relationship with Greg. After the interview, we explained to her and said, hey, listen, in the crime scene, there were some smaller footprints. So we'd like to get a DNA sample just to rule you out. When I asked her about the DNA, I could see her behavior change.
I was there. And then she says it again. I was there.
The witness, M.M., begins to describe what happened on that terrible day.
The girlfriend ends up watching Greg put a pillow over Susan's head, putting the gun up to the side of her head and pulling the trigger. At that point, he looks up and he sees his girlfriend is in the house and witnessing what he just did. And he shoots Susan 2 more times and then tells his girlfriend, that's what happens to people that mess with me. Don't you ever tell anybody what you saw, or I will kill you and I will kill your mother.
The prosecution faces a tough decision: go to trial or offer Gregory Johnson a plea deal.
It made me think that a sure thing, without having to put the victim's family through what's a very traumatic experience, was the right thing to do. And so he engaged in plea negotiations with his attorney. Gregory Johnson pled guilty to a second-degree murder charge. Our recommendation was 298 months, which is almost 25 years. The judge did follow that during the sentencing. During the sentencing, he blamed Susan for what he called meddling in his relationship, when really she was just being a compassionate friend. He showed no remorse for having killed her.
I never imagined that Greg was capable of murder. It used to make me feel guilty that I'd ever introduced him to Sue. Now it just makes me mad.